when I'm taking directions from someone when I'm driving, okay, we're going on a side note, but
Do it.
I will be like, I'm not going straight, I'm going gaily forward.
Hi, and welcome to According to Weeze, the podcast. With me, your girl Weeze. This is a show where we're going to have candid conversations with the hopes of finding a way forward in community. See, fundamentally, I believe that we exist at the intersection of our complex identities, politics, and our sociocultural systems. And let's be real, the only way to dismantle it all is to dissect it. So get cozy, get comfy, and let's dive in. Hey, y'all, and welcome back to whatever episode of this podcast that I am on. This is According to Weeze with me, Weeze, Louisa Weeze Duran. And today, I have someone that you are familiar with because they've been on like 27 million episodes. I mean, not really. They've been on one actual ATW episode, but we've done like all the things together. And if you're subscribed to the newsletter, you got a whole newsletter just dedicated to this human and their work. So you should know them well. They're one of my absolute favorite humans in this world. I always start these episodes. I mean, Tia, you know this. Well, I said your fucking name, so now they know who it is. But I always start by being like, I'm not going to tell you who this is, but I'm going to tell you all the things I love about them. But if I did that, we'd be here for a million years. So instead, I will just say this is one of the dearest, dearest humans in my life. And I am so happy that you're back. Terra Lyn Anderson, say hello to the people.
Hello, people. I wonder how that's
That was your standing ovation.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be back. It feels so good to be like pumped up like that before we start something like this.
Yeah, is that how we should start our Friday calls from now on?
Anytime. Bring it on. We can trade these. It'll be great.
I love it. For context, we literally have a standing call every Friday that obviously we move if pleasure or peace or body, necessitates it. But every Friday, 10:30 a.m., we have a little chatsies for an hour. So, Obvi, you've been here before, but for the people that, I don't know, for the people that are brand new to like life or me that have not seen all of the ways in which, I share your content and how amazing you are. Can you just give the folks real quick, like social identifiers and how you want them to understand the work that you do in the world as of, because we give people permission to constantly evolve. It is June 13th, 2022.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so social identifiers, we'll start there. I am a white, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, non-binary, I don't know, throw a word in there that challenges our heteronormative and cisgender scripts, and you're probably going to nail me on one day of the year. It changes a lot. And let's see, what else? I am also experiencing a good amount of ease in my mind and my body these days. I know that that's temporary. Mm-hmm. And I have been raised with a good amount of financial privilege. I currently sit in some ease around my finances as well. And let's see, religiously non-affiliated in my 30s and regularly coming home to my body.
Yeah. Oh, and the work that you do in this world.
Oh, of course. So I will also say they, them pronouns if y'all haven't caught on to that already just by listening.
Yeah.
Let's see. The work that I do in the world is largely at the intersection of healing and pleasure. I am a therapist by training. I also am a gender equity educator. I run a program called the Queer Competency Certification. And the passion in my work really looks at the intersection between accessibility to pleasure and our social identities.
You also do one other thing that we talked about on the beach a couple years ago.
I don't know why I don't just lead with this. I'm also a sex coach and intimacy coach. Yeah. Yeah, but I don't talk about it that often in public, which needs to change because the corner that I'm turning right now in my life is that I love doing that work so much. It fills me up. It doesn't deplete my cup. And so I really need to be leading with that. So thank you for bringing it out.
You're welcome. And it was a couple years ago. That was like, what, 2019?
Oh, yeah. I've been doing sex coaching with the LGBTQIA community for what, like four years now, at least?
Oh yeah, you've been doing it for like since we came into community, but like our
Yeah.
conversation on the beach was like, dude, why don't you like it's the thing that lights you up, like tell the whole world about it.
It's
So
true.
just like a friendly nudge.
I think.
Okay, so y'all, I don't even have words to really explain like the feels of like joy and excitement for the conversation that we're about to have. So if it's cool with you, TL, I kind of just want to contextualize things for
Yeah.
the folks, and then we can like get into the good stuff.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. So, real quick, for those that maybe did not also catch on or have not seen already, the glorious Terra Lyn and I are launching for the first time a course called Pleasure and Peace. It starts in July 2022. If you're listening to this way past that date, don't you fret, because we're going to be taking cohorts probably forever. And I feel like I can say that pretty confidently because, you know, this really came from, like I said, we have these conversations every Friday. And, you know, we were sitting around kind of talking about really how we want to be orienting ourselves in the work that we do in the world, and really talking about how we felt pigeonholed because with the Great White Awakening of 2020 also came the great, like, I feel like gendered, I don't want to say it was a great awakening, but it was like, you know, when you're napping and then you like open your eyes and you're like, oh, I'm kind of cognizant of what's going on around me. But then like you're kind of in that in between. We're going to call it the great gender in between, because I feel like, and Obvi, please correct me if I'm wrong or I'm giving people too much credit. But I feel like on the heels of the whole world being like, oh, you mean people are marginalized? Like race is real? Then it was like, yeah, hey, you know who else? Like literally everyone. And, you know, gender equity is really important. And so people are kind of now starting to be like, oh, I'm totally like socialized into the binary. Again, it's like a snooze, like a why are you laughing?
I feel like actually it's like the moment in the middle of the night when you wake up and you have no idea where you are.
Wow, you gave them even more credit than I did.
That's what I feel like. That's what I feel like.
Awake.
Well, folks are like, what are kids doing these days? What do they? I don't understand. What is happening? Like that moment of like fear and confusion. I feel like that's where people are at.
Y'all will see that TL regularly gives people more credit than I do, because I for sure played y'all like, you like woke up and you were like, oh, okay, like I'm alive. But then we're like, right back to sleep. TL was like, no, they're awake. They're just confused and scared. I'm like, you know what? We balance each other.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true.
That's good. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. Cool. I will give you that. That's probably nicer. But it's still not great, is the point. But regardless, I say that all of that to say, you know, there's been, and I can say from the outside, like witnessing the way that people have done this to you, you know, and so I'd love for you to like chime in here, actually having lived the experience, but like seeing people be like, oh, you do sex coaching? Oh, you're an actual therapist? Like, oh, you're actually focused on like pleasure and embodiment and body autonomy and all of these other things. But like, please just teach me about pronouns. Like, please just teach me about like gender very specifically and like the existence of the binary and like the basics and like, oh, you do all these other amazing things. Cool. But I want to learn this.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, and I get it. Like,
Yeah.
I get that a lot of folks come into their awareness with like oh shit, I might fuck it up. Like I might do harm.
Mm-hmm.
And so people's priorities tend to go towards doing less harm versus doing all of their internal liberation work,
Mm-hmm.
you know, which we're going to talk about. And I like, so often we go into, okay, let's do the basics, or that's what's asked for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, TL was experiencing that within the like gender equity realm. Obviously, I've been experiencing that through the like anti-oppression, you know, anti-racism realm. And we were just sitting here like, dude, this is actually like, these are like elements of the work that we do. But the work that we have done way before everybody woke up in the middle of the night or like had a great awakening is actually so much bigger than that, and is really about like personal autonomy, is about personal sovereignty, is about liberation, is about learning to like fall so deeply in love with yourself and your body and coming home to yourself, and then like oozing that out into the world and like everything that you touch, right? I'm not going to give you too much because that's why you should sign up for Pleasure and Peace. But like, that's really like the core of the work that, we do. Obviously specialized in different ways through different avenues because of lived experiences. But that's really what it is. And so we were, part of it was just this conversation that we were having of like, I'm like, y'all, I am so frustrated and so done with people just being like anti-racism, anti-racism. Like, I don't want to teach y'all about anti-racism ever fucking again. I mean, I'm going to inherently because it is part of the work that I do, but like, that is not the work that I do. That is not who I am, right? Or like for TL, I feel like I can say it's like gender equity is not who you are. It's not the work that you do. It is an element of understanding the larger context and frameworks that you're trying to teach. So in the process of this, we're having this conversation that we're about to like kind of, unveil for y'all. But we're having this conversation, and what comes from it is this like phrase, this idea of intrapersonal activism. And we'll define it for y'all in a second, and we'll, tell you what it means and all of that. But I just want to like, again, contextualize it of like this really dope moment where like TL, I felt it was like we're just sharing like our hopes for the world and like how we actually view the future and how we want people to understand the work that we actually do and the importance of it. And then we're like, oh, but there isn't a word for it. And like, we're just kind of like playing around in the way that we do. And then we like, both of us do teach the Eyes of Oppression. And like in that, it like funneled into like, this word. And then I Googled it and was like, oh, nobody's talking about this. Like, this isn't a thing yet. And so we birthed a thing.
We birthed a thing.
And it was so cool.
Yeah.
So that was my experience on my side. Like, I'm curious if you want to share with the folks, like, just like what that conversation, that, kind of unveiling was like for you, or development was like for you.
Yeah. Well, I had been seeing in my clients from very different angles, like folks who hold more privilege in their lives or experience the ease of more privilege in their lives, and also folks who hold a lot of marginalization, coming to this question of self-resourcing and pleasure and healing, like with some pretty similar obstacles, actually. So I've been kind of thinking about like, what is going on in folks that it's so hard for people to be doing their inner work in order to be resourced to like do the outer work that needs to happen. And when you brought up this pigeonholing feeling in your work and like where we overlap in terms of our passions around healing and liberation, right? It was like, gosh, I've been thinking about this thing and I feel like you're speaking exactly to it. And then from there is like, after speaking the words intrapersonal activism out loud, we we're like, oh my gosh, da 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 da. And then started defining it and like talking about what it means and like this beautiful sharing of understanding and awareness of this thing that folks aren't really talking about yet.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it was like that moment of, because, I always say, like, we liberate others by way of our own liberation. And so it was like, exactly like thinking about like, how do we actually create a process for people to understand what by way of their own liberation means? And that actually every single one of us, regardless of whether you're at the epicenter of privilege or the fringes of marginalization, not only have access, if you so choose, right? You have access to be able to liberate yourselves. And obviously the journey's different and the obstacles are different to get there, even though some are the same and right, based on your social identities. But it was this idea that like everybody is like so focused on the like liberate others, well, not everyone. The people that we work with, I should say, and the people that are in our communities are very focused on the liberating others aspect. And then the biggest obstacle that I kept seeing was y'all are so focused on like helping everyone else, which is amazing. And I love the intention for you, but you continually neglect yourself, right? And so from there, it's like, I had created that cycle of sustainable revolution trying to like teach people. And it was like, y'all still aren't getting it. But whose fault is that, right? Like I asked myself as an educator, whose fault is that? It's not the student's fault, right? It's like there's still a piece missing. So what is that missing piece? The missing piece is that we have to take people through a very specific process just for their own intrapersonal activism, their own personal liberation. And like, what could that look like? And then from there, obviously, Pleasure and Peace was born. And we figured like, okay, we can make this crack over 7 months, like that works. But yeah, so I think I really just want to tell the people what we mean and like start talking about the thing.
Yeah, let's define it.
Okay. Go ahead, Boo. Why don't you define it for us?
Okay. So the way that we're defining intrapersonal activism right now is the personal liberation process of reclaiming your internal narratives as an act of divesting from systems of oppression.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have so many things to say, but obviously the educators in me is like, let's break this down. Like, what do we mean? So what do we mean by personal liberation?
Yeah. So the way that I'm thinking about personal liberation is locating yourself in the process of social change, right? Like, how do you on your own, from the inside out, truly start to free yourself from systems of oppression? How are you defining it?
I think it's very much that, but like if I really the thing that I've been sitting with most recently is this idea. So Asad Shakur has, a very famous quote that we have nothing to lose but our chains. And so from there, I've thought really about like, obviously, well, no, some people very literally are still chained within our system, but like, the every person, regardless of the literal chains that they might be bound to, has these invisible internal socio-emotional, socio-mental shackles. And what I mean by that is like our emotional capacities or the way that we think we're allowed to have access to our emotions or express them, right? Our mental states, our beliefs, the way that we feel at any given moment, the way we think we're allowed to feel. That's what I mean, like by kind of that term, but it's like they're still bound, they're still shackled, and they're still really informed by how we locate ourselves within society. And so when I think about personal liberation, I really think about breaking those chains from a mental, emotional place of being able to have like full sovereignty and having the freedom to access all of your emotions and like, express them. Obviously, we'll get into the idea around like truth and safety and like all of those things in a little bit. But like just personal liberation to me, like for me on the core level, I always think about like, I feel free. The moment I began to feel free was the moment that I felt like I actually had sovereignty over the access to and the expression of my mental state and my emotions.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that there's another really important piece that you're naming already, and I'm just going to like re-articulate.
Yeah.
Is that it is about what we can do for ourselves.
Yeah.
On our road to liberation, right? It's about the personal agency that we have. Like you're naming this moment where you had full agency and autonomy to access all of you, right? So that piece of like, and we're going to get into, what does reclamation mean in a minute, but like taking back that agency and autonomy, I think that that's really at the root of what we're naming personal liberation here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really that like, it's sovereignty, from a thing that you can't like see or touch or point to, but exists and you feel it.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. So that's personal liberation. And obviously process is just like, you got to go through a process to unlearn and learn, right? But that is what leads us to reclamation, right? For me, the word reclamation has been so important. Obviously, I have a whole course literally called Reclaim for, melanated folks, socialized female, because that really is what it is. I feel like, again, like I just think about it from not only my experience, but the experiences that I've been able to witness, not only in friends and family and close ones, but in clients, of this moment of empowerment in the taking back of self and like being able to stand in that so confidently, and not necessarily confidently all the time, but at least to be able to say like, actually, like that is me. I've located myself. I know what home feels like, and I'm taking it back from the systems and the people and the power dynamics that have continuously robbed me of that and or tried to stand in my way.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Absolutely. I feel like there is something about I'm going to actually name this right here, and we can talk more about it later if we want. But there's a similarity, a place where, I think the literature right now is seeing an overlap between oppression and trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is the stripping of one's power, right? And because we are born into systems of oppression, it happens from the very, very beginning that our power, our personal power, gets stripped from us as we are indoctrinated into ways of thinking about ourselves and each other. And so the reclamation process really is around taking back that personal power, right? And saying, no, this is mine. This is for me. I get to conceptualize myself. I get to have access to my body. I get to have access to my emotions, right? And so I feel like the reclamation is what this process is, and we have to do it over and over again because we can't we can't deny that systems of oppression are operating, regardless of how much work we do, right, on ourselves. Yeah,
absolutely. So the next thing that I want to name or help people unpack is this idea of internal narratives. And like for full transparency, y'all, before we hopped on, TL and I sat here for like probably 10 minutes being like, internal narratives is such like, it is a therapy term, but it is also such like if you've worked in like social welfare or sociology, any sort of behavioral science, like that's a term that you're very comfortable with, you know what it means. And then we were like, wait, the very thing that we want to do is like liberate and create access to. And TL and I both do this in our work of like, we want to take these really complex, highly, ideological academic terms and just make them digestible and accessible to everybody because everybody deserves them. And we're like, oh, should we? And then we're like, you know what? We're going to use this because this is actually, but then also I will name the balance of us being like, we know exactly what we want to say, and this actually does say exactly what we want to say.
mm-hmm.
But I think that that's important to share because it just speaks to like, one, the real birthing process that we're in right now of like what this means. And also that like this might continue to evolve, right? Like this is summer of 2022. Like holler at us in a year, we might have to even evolve this definition based on what's happening around us. But for now, Teal, why don't you unpack internal narratives for us? Because you actually just said it and you did the really cool thing where like you didn't even realize that you did it. But go ahead.
Shit. I was like, what did I say? Yeah. So I think that, what we were kind of talking around when we were like, what is this word internal narratives? What does it encompass? I think what we were naming really is that these words encompass the way in which we see ourselves, right? Our self-concept, the stories that we accept about ourselves, that we internalize, that we make our own, that we think are normal, that we accept, right? I think I've said that a couple of times now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the internal narrative piece is really important here because this intrapersonal activism is unique in that we're looking at how we see ourselves, right? We're looking about how we conceptualize our identities and our location in society, right? It's not an externally focused activism like we talk about with a lot of the other eyes of oppression, right? And the other eyes around activism. For those folks who, maybe it's worth it to name those real quick is just ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized, right? Are the other eyes that we often talk about. And so intrapersonal is really more about how we are seeing ourselves, right? What else do you want to say about it, Lise?
I mean, so I literally wrote down what you said.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ways that we think about ourselves and each other.
Yeah, there we go.
Right?
So many fewer words. Jeez.
It's okay. But something that you named, and we'll talk about the difference for y'all in a second of interpersonal activism and intrapersonal, because it's worth giving a little asterisk to. But I think it is important to really explain that the internal narratives aspect come from that fourth eye of internalized, right? So it's like the internalized oppression, like you go through the world, you navigate the world because of interpersonal oppression, right? You internalize that oppression. And what we're talking about is the process of freeing yourself from everything that you've internalized.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And so all of those internal narratives, that's the internalization of the oppression. And to be clear, and we've said this before, but I think it's just worth explicitly naming so everybody can really see that they can locate themselves in this process, is that we have all internalized those narratives, whether you have all the privileges in the world or none of the privileges in the world. We've all internalized them. They show up differently. They present themselves as maybe guilt or shame and or, undeservingness, lack of worthiness, like whatever. I'm like naming all of the potential possibilities in the spectrum. But every single one of us has a process to work through. Every single one of us is being denied access to our full humanity, is being denied access to that sovereignty, right? That personal liberation because of the entire system of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
So you all hold internal narratives. We all do.
Mm-hmm.
Because every single one of us has internalized all of the oppressive ideologies that govern our society, right? And so that's really, really important to name here, like as we're unpacking it. So, and then I think, just as an act of divesting from oppressive systems is that to me feels very like clear. It's like you're stepping outside of all of the things like the very fabric of our society that currently governs our sociopolitical realities that oppress people. And you're kind of like, yeah, big middle finger.
Yeah. Yep. And I will say I think that this is so at the root. Intrapersonal activism is so at the root because if you're not doing that internal work of reclaiming those narratives about yourself, then we go out and we try to do external activism, right? And we deplete ourselves so fast that we cannot be an agent of change for very long. And that perpetuates the systems of oppression. And also then on the inside, we tend to uphold or project these parts of ourselves that we haven't reclaimed, right? And so in that way, we're also still feeding the things that we really aim to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for folks that are familiar with, my frameworks and have listened to enough of my episodes, y'all hear me talk a lot about like what a true accomplice is, like ally, co-conspirator, and accomplice. And if you're not familiar, you can go to episode 19 of That's Not How That Works with my boo Trudy and I, where we explain it very clearly. But this is literally the thing that holds people back from going from co-conspirator to accomplice, right? That co-conspirator is that person that's like, yeah, I've internalized all the things, but like, rah, rah, I'm going to fight the fight and I'm going to do the thing. It is MLK's like, he said white moderate, but I really say like, quote unquote, privileged moderate, because it depends obviously at any given moment. Like, are we talking about gender? Are we talking about religion? Like whatever the identity is, right? That is literally the thing that keeps people, whether they recognize it or not, whether they're cognizant or not, to really step into their accompliship, because they are still so deeply baked from like internally, personally, they're still so deeply like baked in the sauce of all of the systems of oppression that they're doing the actions, but their nervous system, their personal ideologies, right? The way that they think about things, the way that they think the shoulds and woulds and supposed tos are still very much so like intertwined and integrated with that oppressive system. And so this is why folks that really do this work and or have gone through a personal liberation process can name it and say like, hey, I appreciate that you're on your journey. And like, you're saying all the things, or you're doing all the things and saying all the things, but like, I still don't trust the way you move. Or like, I can see that, you're well-intentioned, but your intention and your impact don't match up. Like we hear a lot of that right now, like publicly. And what people are getting to is literally the fact that you haven't gone through that personal liberation process. And so you're still holding on to internal narratives that are informed by oppressive systems. And because you have not been able to fully divest, you have not yet reclaimed your personhood. You're not standing in your sovereignty. And that is what is getting in the way of you just being an authentic accomplice.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, absolutely.
So if nothing else, if your own personal freedom didn't mean that much to you, because I know a lot of us still have to find something outside of ourselves to orient to do a thing, this is actually the thing that is going to allow you to step into that accomplishment. Because, I also teach, and I know you do because it's in QCC, but, we both teach that in order to actually be a part of the liberatory process, you have to understand the eyes of oppression and you have to get to the internalized place. And once you can begin to turn the tide on the ways that you've internalized those narratives, you can free yourself, right? You go through a process of intrapersonal activism. Then you start to change ideologies, right? You flip the entire system on its head because you're showing up now in the world in a different way. Your internal makeup looks different. So the way you're engaging with people looks different. The way you're engaging with systems looks different.
Yeah.
And if enough of us can do this, we can change ideologies.
And if you aren't sold on it enough yet after hearing like all of the brilliance that just came out of Wheeze, I just want to like give you a couple of like taglines just to summarize.
Yeah,
right?
do
We're
it.
talking about healing as disruption. We're talking about self-love as power.
Yes.
We're talking about pleasure as justice. Just let that sink in for a moment. That's what we're doing here, right? And starting from that place makes everything else that you do more sustainable, more efficient, if you care about that, right? You know, it, like the energy that we pour into social change and pour into liberating one another really starts at home in your own body, and how well you are able to hold yourself, access yourself, right? Be with yourself. That's the process we're talking about. That's the journey we want folks to start with here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really important here to name, like, and this is why we called it our course, Pleasure and Peace, because we're also not saying that you're going to go through a process of personal liberation and then you're going to go out into the world and like everything's going to be straight. Like everything's going to be cool. You're fine.
Hope not everything's going to be straight.
I literally, as soon as I said it, in my head, I was like, oh, AAVE has some work to do. I kid you not. My first thought, like before you even said it, I was like, that's interesting. And so for people that don't know, TL knows this, I'll say a thing and then in that moment, it'll resonate to me like where it is rooted in. And then I'll be like, let's have a conversation about etymology and the roots of words and why that exists and how we could begin to change it. And now I really want to have that conversation, but that's a whole other episode, so I will stop.
When I'm taking directions from someone when I'm driving, okay, we're going on a side note, but
do it.
I will be like, I'm not going straight, I'm going gaily forward.
I love it. So, we're not telling you that you're going to show up in the world and things are going to be gaily forward. We're not telling you that you're going to go through a personal liberation process and everybody's just going to be like, oh my God, this is so amazing for you. I embrace this. And like, I'm totally going to mind my own fucking business and leave you alone to like do your shit and live your life the way that you want to. That's literally actually not at all most likely what's going to happen unless you live in very specific enclaves of very specific parts of the world where every single other person, even if they don't actually believe that you're allowed to like live your life and be your best self, at least understand that that particular place has social norms where like, I'm not allowed to tell you that, you can't do certain things. That's a very important distinction. Also a TED Talk for another time. But regardless, there's a reason that I bring this up, and that's because the other side of this coin of personal liberation is also through your process of divesting from oppressive systems, you're also going to learn them and understand them. And again, the process of locating yourself in that system, you're going to learn it and understand it because unfortunately, you will have to play chess with the rest of society that does adhere to these systems in order to maintain your truth and maintain your safety. Because the closer you are to personal liberation, the more you are going to ruffle the feathers of other people's, very, I call them the demons of oppression that live inside of people's souls. I know that sounds very dramatic, but that's how I view it. But you're going to ruffle those demons that are hiding in the corners of people's souls, right? Whose internal narratives are still very much like rah, rah, oppressive system, boom, bah. Like that's just what's going to happen. And so that is why the peace, like y'all know, protecting your peace is like a cornerstone of my work, literally, being copywritten for that purpose. But it's really about how do I maintain my safety? How do I understand my location in society so that I can live a liberated life? I can stand in my personal sovereignty. I can stand in, my authentic self and be free in it. And also understand that I'm going to have to balance that with safety. I'm going to have to balance my truth with safety. I'm going to have to learn how to navigate it. And sometimes that is going to mean making choices that forego that truth at any given moment.
Mm-hmm.
Where sometimes prioritizing my safety means not prioritizing that truth in any given moment. But there's a difference between making that decision, because that's still a sovereign choice, and doing it from a place of understanding so that you can then unpack it, right? And like maybe you have to have a moment of mourning or grief, like that you had to make that choice, and you can do that in community and being cognizant and having self-awareness around it.
Yeah.
Right? That's very different than I'm going to continue to oppress myself and hide myself and deny my humanity and deny my joy and my pleasure and my peace and my all the other things, right? All my other human emotions, because that is safety.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to deny my truth and forego my truth always,
Mm-hmm.
because that keeps me safe, right? There's actually a version of life that says I can have my truth and my safety. And in moments that I can't, at least I understand how to balance it, and I'm going to make that choice for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like without doing this work, we tend to walk through or move through the world in a way that we're inherently separated from ourselves. We got like these internal narratives that are going on underneath the surface that keep us disjointed, dismembered in some way. And from that place, moving through and navigating safety sometimes looks like disowning ourselves even further, right? When we're doing the process in intrapersonal activism, I feel like there is an inherent connection to our worth, to our bodies, in our goodness, right? To our wholeness. And from that place, when we're navigating an oppressive world, orienting to safety, there's a conscious way in which we armor up to do that. And then we consciously armor down when we don't have to anymore. But without doing this work, we tend to walk through the whole world with armor, such that like we get callous, you know? And I feel like, in my work with my clients, specifically, my queer and trans clients, we talk about this a lot, consciously armoring up and consciously armoring down, because we can't be ourselves in every space and stay safe, And so I think that what you're naming here is so important. We're really treating ourselves like we are precious, right? Protecting ourselves like we are precious. And that leads to this place of peace that we're so consciously protecting, right? Those boundaries that your work so beautifully lays out, help people to put those in place. Yeah, because without them, we stay disconnected from ourselves. We have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, on the flip side, like on the flip side, meaning my work, not like the flip side of what you said, but in my work, we call it the process of weathering, right? Just because sociologically, like that's the term that I was taught.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of the work that I do with my melanated clients. So like if you are melanated, you've heard me talk about our process of weathering, right? Which is like very similar. You have to leave the house and you have to put on that armor, but you are out there, and unfortunately, it does feel like you have to weather a storm. It is a tempest raining down on you at all times. And even if you're not cognizant that it's raining down on you, you are always so mentally tuned into the fact that the storm could arise at any given moment that you never find a moment of peace. And so you're carrying around this armor all the time. But it has been, you leave anything out in the elements for long enough, even if it's supposed to be weatherproofed, it's going to get cracks. It's going to get, maybe mold or torn and tattered. It literally, it has a negative impact on you psychologically, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Your whole soul, right, goes through a process of weathering. Your spirit, everything that you are goes through that process of weathering. And so our interest is, instead of teaching folks, because to be clear, even if you are, white, or even if you are cis, you, again, remember, you as well, you too have been oppressed, or you too have been rather taught to adhere to oppressive systems, right? Every single one of us, our storm is different. Our storm is more intense depending on the layers of marginalization that we hold, right? But every single one of us goes through that process.
Yeah.
And our interest here is, instead of continuing to teach folks how to armor up and teach folks how to be strong and resilient, or live underneath the bullshit veil of strength and resilience. Because let me tell you something right now, sidebar, actually, very quickly. Motherfuckers is tired of having to be strong and resilient. Literally, I was talking to one of my best friends, actually, Crystal, who lives in Portland.
Oh, yeah.
TL has heard a lot about Crystal. We were on the phone yesterday and we were like, yo, like, I'm fucking tired. I want to be cared for. I want to be pampered. I want to be spoiled. And I'm not talking like, oh, buy me things, like literally emotionally. Like, I want to be tended to.
Yeah.
I want ease and grace and pleasure. I want softness. And I want to be able to like bask in all of that, not just with like partners in community, because you can ask that from those people, you know, if you have that intimate connection, if you've built that trust and that safety. But I'm talking about from the world. I want to be able to like frolic in a field and have people be like, that is so beautiful for you. Let me leave you the fuck alone. Instead of asking you, like, are you lost or you look suspicious, you know, or whatever the case is. Like, that's what we want. I don't want to be strong anymore. I don't want to be resilient. Honestly, I want to be able to fall apart in public if I feel like it, because I can't be strong anymore. Like, those are the things that we want.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now back to what we were talking about. The point is, we don't want to teach from a perspective of like how to survive with armor. We don't even want to have to use battle language. Even the language that we use around our survival is rooted in war.
Yeah.
That's not what we want. Instead, we want to flip this shit on its head and we want to reorient people. We want to orient people, instead of survival, to thriving through peace and pleasure and joy and like full embodiment. Like, there are exercises in pleasure and peace that are going to blow y'all's fucking mind, and we are so excited about. Like, right? Just like the process of like savoring every single bit of your human experience. Like I said, basking in it, enjoying it, reveling in it.
Yeah.
Like, that's what we want to teach folks.
Yeah. So take a minute, those of you who are listening, and just imagine for a moment in your mind's eye what it looks like to thrive. Like, can you even? Right? And then take a moment to take a step even higher, like above, like take a balcony view on that image that you just came to. And look at, what is it exactly that you were imagining? Was it your surroundings? Was it the conditions of your life? Right? Or was it the felt sense in your body of what it actually feels like to thrive? Right? Did you have a sensory experience? Because I think very few of us do, actually, when we think about thriving, have a sensory experience.
Yeah.
And that's the piece that I think is so important to come back to and talk about, which is what we're doing in Pleasure and Peace, is really centering our bodies as the vehicle for our healing, as the vehicle for our pleasure, as the vehicle of thriving, right? And coming back into the reality that oppression is systems of oppression, whether you are looking at the privilege or the marginalization. The aim of it is to disconnect us from our bodies, is to leave us unfeeling, right? Or wrong in some way. And so the reclamation process is so about coming back into right relationship with our senses, with our breath, with our movement in whatever way we have access to movement. Right? And really being able to feel what it is to thrive, not just think about it like we're floating heads, Yeah.
I'm having a like full moment, like full circle moment, because I think in like 2018, I posted on before I got kicked off Facebook, like on Facebook and on IG, like it was totally just one of those like, this is how I feel today. You know, it wasn't intended to be hella thought provoking or anything like that, but it was really just this post about, and I've like reposted it so many times that I can like see it, but that the system's survival is actually predicated on the maintenance of our internal turmoil.
Yeah, absolutely. Hands
right?
down.
And what could it look like
Mm-hmm.
for the revolution that actually disrupts the system to be a finding, and at the time I was calling it like an internalized peace,
Mm-hmm.
but like what could it look like to internalize peace for yourself and for that to be the thing that disrupts the system? So I'm like totally having this full circle moment because I'm like, oh shit, we're literally teaching it.
Yeah, here we are.
Like, this thing that I was just like kind of playing with as an idea a couple years ago is like, this is actually what it is.
Yeah.
Like how revolutionary is it that in all reality, when we really strip away everything,
Mm-hmm.
that what we know, because, in this audio room, we're going to call it an audio room because they're not with us, but they're listening. I like that audio room. In this chamber, this audio chamber, we have awareness around embodiment, sociology, therapy, mental health, behavioral sciences, and social science, like all of the things. Like between the two of us, we have all of these aspects and elements, right, that we've been trained in to view people and the world and systems and healing specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And through every single one of those lenses, this continues to be the thing that we both come back to.
Yeah.
That if we as a whole collective, I'm talking everybody, I'm even talking the people that hate us most, like truly.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I've always said I feel bad for those people because they are so disconnected from their own humanity that they literally don't know anything else but misery and hate.
Mm-hmm.
Because they literally don't know how to love themselves. They don't know how to come home to themselves. They are so fragmented. They are so far from their own healing or the possibility of their own healing that they simply don't know how, right? So even for them, if every single one of us could commit to and intrapersonal activism and go through a process of personal liberation, that would be the thing that actually disrupts the system as we know it. And that would be the thing that actually brings about the flow of change.
Oh, yeah. If we were truly connected to ourselves and our bodies, I don't think that there's a single person that could tolerate what's happening. No.
Also, you would be so focused on your own joy and happiness, you wouldn't care what other people are doing. I literally posted this like 2 days ago, and I did, again, it was like, the funny thing is I posted it because of a conversation that I was having with a stranger on Twitter who tried to come for me over the Lakers and the Celtics and the Warriors. And all I said to them was, you do know that indifference is an option accessible to you, right? Like the opposite of loving and supporting and writing for something does not inherently mean hatred and saltiness. Like indifference is a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean indifference in like, oh, I don't care about that thing. Like I'm indifferent, like in the way that we kind of weaponize it, but like true indifference, like, frankly, it doesn't matter what that person on that, my neighbor is doing or the person across the street is doing. Like, does it make them happy? Are they living their best life? Is it hurting anyone? No? Then I'm indifferent. Live your best life, boo. Enjoy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm so tapped into my own healing. I'm like, yes, I don't get it. That's not a choice I would make for me, but I don't really need to.
Yeah.
I love this for you.
Yeah.
Go be free. Like, go be great. Like,
mm-hmm.
And that's what we want. That's where we want everyone else to get to.
Yeah. And to be clear, what we're not saying is that when people are going and committing violent acts or being violent, that you're indifferent to that. That is not what we're saying.
Oh, no.
What we are very much saying is that we are each committed to our own peace and our own sovereignty, right? Such that whatever, strokes that other person loves for themselves, that's great for them. Go do it.
Right. Yeah. And there's like that key phrase of like, are you causing harm? No? Cool. Right? Like, obviously, if people are causing harm, you better get real activated.
Yeah, exactly.
At least that's my expectation for my community and the people that are around me, right? I think the last thing that I want to do before we wrap up, because I realize we didn't really do it, and I know that there's like a very common misconception around what pleasure actually means, is like, what do we mean by pleasure? How do we define pleasure?
I'm like making the sounds.
I know, I see it. I love it.
It starts there for me, like so not with the words, but it's really truly an embodied experience. And I think that the misconception that you're speaking to, I think, is a lot of people see pleasure as a sexual thing, right? And that when we're talking about pleasure, we're talking about something that is inherently sexual or erotic. And that is not actually what we aim to do here, to silo our pleasure to the bedroom or wherever else you like to have sex, right? Like, that's not what we're doing. What we're doing actually is to support people to get so deeply connected with their bodies that any sense in any moment can bring you pleasure, right? Like the sight of, a beautiful sunset, or the smell of your favorite tea, or the feeling of a soft blanket, right? Any of your senses. And really that you're fully milking everything that your body has to offer. Yeah.
I'll leave y'all with an example. And I've already told TL this, but some of y'all may know, some of y'all may not. I had double eye surgery and I can now actually like see, which is so I'm 36. So for the first time in 36 years, I can really see detail in things. And so 3 days after my surgery, I was going for a walk and I was like, oh my God. And my partner, of course, because I just had surgery, and I have my like really cool goggles on, is like, what happened? Like, did something get in your eye? He's like freaking out. And I was like, no, leaves have veins in them. And I was like, you would have thought that somebody just gave me like $20 trillion. Like my level of, because obviously that's what people connect, like extreme joy to. But it was just like, that moment of like, I can see a thing that is so simple and is such an ordinary thing. There are leaves, well, maybe not everywhere because deforestation and so many other things, but at least where I live in the Bay Area, we have a lot of greenery, So it's like, and then I'm like, every leaf looks different. Different plants have different like architecture to them. And then we get to like this flower bush that I've always loved. It's the same walk we always take with, with Lola. And I, again, I'm like, oh my God, have these flowers always been this vibrant? Look at this color. So deep. Like I was like losing my shit to the point where I was having such an embodied experience of joy that like I started crying tears of joy. Not just because the surgery worked, but because for the first time I was really experiencing life, like nature in all of its beauty, in all of its glory, in all of its intricacies and its differences, down to like spider webs that like live on the plants in my house that like are outside that like one I didn't even know were there before, So I was like, there's two things happening. We have a lot of spiders, and two, like, look at how cool they are. Look at how this spider has created a web on this plant and then like strings to this next plant so it can travel. Like, this is fucking mind blowing and so beautiful.
Yeah.
And like so fucking cool.
Yeah.
That like I was literally crying tears of joy, just like so happy to be able to experience it. Like, that is pleasure.
Yeah.
And then, old me would have been like, girl, people gonna think you crazy. Literally, right? Because I was like being so excited, like shouting and yelling in the street. And the average person would walk by and be like, because we judge people literally like, oh, that person must not be well. I'm talking to plants. I don't care. I think whatever you want. Again, that's your internalized narrative.
Exactly.
That causes you to project, things onto me and miscategorize and misuse mental health terms and all those other things. That's a you thing. That has nothing to do with me. I am having a moment of pleasure and I am enjoying it and I really don't care. And like, you can either join me or leave me the fuck alone. And so like, and again, right, that had nothing to do with any of the ways we define pleasure, but it was such an amazing moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's what we're talking about, being able to access that.
Absolutely. That's such a perfect example, because our bodies are so different, right? And we each have access to movement and sensation and different senses in different ways, right? I think that it's really important to name that finding how arousal moves through your body. And again, I'm not talking about sexual arousal. I'm talking about sensory arousal and riding that fucking wave. And really letting yourself go fully through it, right? To experience like every last drop of that experience. That's what we're talking about. It's like that is thriving. And that lives in each of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because on the flip side of that, before I had sight,
Mm-hmm.
For me it was sound.
Yeah.
That's why I had and I still do, right? It's not going to go away, but I have such a very special connection to like sound and music and all of those types of things because I did not have access to sight. And so, again, just using myself as a real life example for those that are listening, again, everyone has access to this in different ways. And whatever you have access to, like, this is probably the most inclusive process
Mm-hmm.
because it's about you coming home to you.
Mm-hmm.
What does your home look like? And what your home looks like is going to be totally different than your neighbor's home. And that's what we want. And that's what we're going to celebrate. And then also take you on a process to learn how to celebrate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything we left out that you want to say to the people?
Mm. There was one more point, honestly, that I've been thinking about and holding and
Yeah.
just like wondering when the right time was to
Yeah.
bring it up. And so I'm gonna name it. I hear from a lot of folks a lot of the time who are overwhelmed by the amount of social change that needs to happen in order for us all to be liberated. Right. And there's so many folks who like come into my DMs or in my classes that are like, what do I do? How do I do the right thing? Right. And I think that the overwhelm comes from this place of seeing how big the problem is and realizing that the resources that we have as individuals aren't going to cut it. There's no way one person can overthrow how many centuries that have like built us up to this place, right? And so in that recognition that we as individuals don't have the resourcing to make the change that we know is necessary, defeat comes, right? And so we're operating in our activism from a place of already feeling defeated.
Yeah.
But intrapersonal activism locates what you can do inside of yourself to be a part of the change, right? It relies on nobody but you. It's something that each of us can do inside of ourselves. And I feel like there is so much power and hope in that. And I want to leave people on that note of just recognizing like how much we each can do in ourselves to disrupt. Yeah.
I love that. That's such an important point. Yeah. Well, the last thing I'll say is just a shameless plug because I'm so excited about our course. Y'all, again, it starts July 6th. Really, really important note. While this is accessible to everybody, we actually do have separate groups. We have very intentionally thought about the ways in which our different social identities, specifically around gender identity and racial identity, do impact our experiences and have maybe a higher potential for harm, those types of things. And we want people to be able to navigate this from the start with the largest amount of nervous system safety that we can provide, right? And so doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your social identity is. If this speaks to you and you want to get in on this and you want to learn how to do this and you want to be a part of this, go to the link. It'll be in the show notes. There is an application process. And by application process, I mean, we just want to know where you're at and, how you're thinking about these things. There's no right or wrong answer. It's literally, it's like, it's a pleasure and peace weaseling in air. See what I did there?
Did that. You
I did
really
that.
did
And it actually worked. But we're really, really orienting all of our work towards this. I honestly would not be surprised if I just stopped teaching everything else and only taught this at some point because I just think it's so important and it brings me joy. It brings me pleasure in my work to do this. I know I can say the same for TL. But yeah, come check it out. You can email, I'll open up my DM. TL, I don't know if you're open to DM. Okay, so DMs open on both sides. Questions, comments, concerns, but holler at us and get in on this. And you can apply it, quote unquote, apply at any time because whenever we start a new cohort, it's first come, first serve. Google form is really cool about time and date stamping everything. So we'll admit people as we go. And we're keeping the groups really, really small and intimate, like 8 to 10 max, most likely. But yeah, I think that's it. Oh, the only other thing I do want to say, and you might not care, but I think this is really important. Y'all will hear me call Terra Lyn TL.
Mm-hmm.
Because Terra Lyn is somebody, like I said at the beginning of this episode, who is my actual family. And that is a name that I have for them. It is a nickname that I have for them. Nicknames, like many other things, are not accessible to everybody. So their name is Terra Lyn Anderson, commonly Terra. I even use Terra Lyn, right? Like I use the full thing, but they go by Terra Anderson. And so just because you hear me saying TL does not mean that that is a level of intimacy that you just have access to, right? It's very different than me saying, please call me Wheeze, which I explicitly tell everybody, call me Wheeze, right? Even when after years of being friends and intimate friendship, I was like, I really like TL. Can I just start calling you TL? Like, again, permission, right?
Yeah.
So that's actually something that I think is really important because I talk about you a lot and I say TL, and then sometimes people reference you as TL to me. And then I like feel very defensive of like your consent because I love you. And so that means that it's also my responsibility to remind people of that.
Yeah.
And so I know you wanted to leave people on like this really lovely, like, what does pleasure and peace and all these things mean to you and like the importance of it. But I had to do that too.
Yeah. And here you are just being like, boundaries.
Yeah, actually, yeah, but look at that. That was the peace side of it.
Yes, true Wheeze form. So
Okay,
good.
now we're really done.
So good.
I love you. Thank you for being here.
I love you too.
All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this. Check out the show notes for all the links and the things. And if you want to continue having this conversation, unpacking, getting additional resources, there is a podcast Facebook group now. You have to join the Academy, which is yep, I just did it last night. Tia looks very excited. You can have access to it by joining the Academy, which is like my version of Patreon. You can find all the links everywhere at any level, starting as low as $5. But that gets you access to additional community, additional education, additional unpacking and coaching around these things. So I'll see y'all in there. All right, y'all. Toodles. All right, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in. Rate, review, subscribe, like, share this podcast with all of your peoples. Follow me on Instagram. And you can always join me in community over at Podia. Until next time.